tonight, eh?
Milo, is that you?
There, I think I got it. All right, so this is episode whatever, I don't know. It might even be close to 100 and something. It might be late 90s, early 100s.
I was a late 90.
Yeah, you were actually 3 years old in the year 2000, which I find to be very unnerving. And for anybody who doesn't recognize that voice, that's Shane, the Young Gun Mason.
Yellow.
When was it? May of 2015 when we first hooked up?
Yeah, it was just...
Yes. Yeah,
it may be in a little... Yeah, right around then.
Yeah, we're coming up to our 2-year anniversary.
I know, man.
And
all because of a photo.
Yeah, all because I screwed up, which is the beauty of my life.
What's new?
And we have Bruce Kelly, who lives in Medford, Oregon, as Joe Fugate says. I say Oregon, just like some people.
I say Oregon too, but that's
just like
I'm not from there.
And just like some people say Toronto.
Yeah.
And the second T is silent, so it's Toronto.
Or Portsmouth. That's another one. It says it's spelled Portsmouth, but they pronounce it Portsmouth.
Yeah, exactly. And so you're all the way from Medford, Oregon. And you're a former firefighter from Connecticut, Westport, Connecticut.
Yeah.
And now you work for Campbell Scale Models and Microtrains.
Yeah.
And finally, bringing up the rear, not that don't take that the wrong way, is none other than Tony Cook, who is the editor of Model Railroad News, the co-editor of HO Collector Quarterly, and an associate editor at Railroad Model Craftsman.
Yes, indeed.
Did I get that all right?
You nailed every one of those, yeah. Right on.
And tonight we're going to talk to a really interesting guy. We're going to talk to a fellow named Blaine Hatfield, who used to work at ExactRail and almost single-handedly brought the hobby to a standstill when he left ExactRail. Blaine, are you there?
I am, but I think that's going a little too far.
Not if you read some of the forums. Oh my God, Blaine has left ExactRail.
It was amazing. The outpouring was, it was like, wow. I mean, but that's if you've ever met Blaine at a show and talked to him, I mean, there's a reason for that. I mean, people in the hobby really like him a lot.
Yes.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Yes, Blaine, you're a wonderful man, but unfortunately you almost brought the hobby to a standstill. So you're from Utah. Whereabouts in Utah do you live?
So I was born and raised in Utah.
Yes.
But when I left ExactRail, I also left the state of Utah.
Oh, did you really?
I did, yes. I currently live in Sheridan, Wyoming.
Wow. So this is going to be a long and exciting story because also I was talking to Tony Cook some time ago when we were doing a version of Viewer Post Vacation Cruise. It might have even been number 15, Tony, but I can't swear to that. And he indicated to me that you're running an RPM meet.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah. I operate the Mountain States Railroad Prototype Modelers Meet.
And whereabouts is that held?
So it's held in Evanston, Wyoming, which is about an hour and 20 minutes east of Salt Lake City.
Okay. So Wyoming is primarily east of, now we have people that listen to us from all over the world. So Wyoming is primarily east of Utah or northeast of Utah?
Well, it shares a border with Utah.
Okay.
And that border is to the northeast of Utah.
All right. Okay. And
all right. Wait. He's in Sheridan? Is that where you're living?
So I live in Sheridan. Sheridan is
north.
That's correct. Yeah. It's about the center of the state, just minutes south of the Wyoming-Montana border.
Okay. All right. Now I understand. All right.
So do any of you people know where Wyoming is?
Yes. I got a map. And it's up.
Beautiful country out there.
Okay. Quick question. In what state is Rapid City, South Dakota? All
Mount
right.
Rushmore. Mount
New
Rushmore.
Mexico.
Yeah.
Mount
Okay. So to describe
It's
it.
pronounced city, right? It's
Yeah.
pronounced city. Right?
Yeah, exactly. It's pronounced city.
Am I saying that right?
Yeah.
Uh,
Okay. So I think to give people a better indication, so Utah is basically a rectangle state running north to south with the top right-hand corner, a big chunk of it cut out, and that's where Wyoming intersects. Is that the word? Intersects with Utah. So there's Sure, yeah. And then Sheridan's not too far in that little corner. If Utah was a rectangle state without any chunks out of it, Sheridan would be in that corner of Utah. So not too far from Salt Lake City.
So Sheridan is about 9 hours from Salt Lake.
yeah, Sheridan's up on the northern border. Of
Okay.
Wyoming.
Yeah, well,
Almost like straight north of, if you look at that line of like Denver, Colorado
Right.
Springs,
Yeah.
and then Cheyenne's north. Yeah, Sheridan's all the way at the top of Wyoming.
It's
So-
on.
so
So is it I-90?
and so apparently I don't have a map either.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, there it is. All right. So how did you end up with? Okay, we're going to have to get back to that. But so Evanston is an hour away from Sheridan.
Okay.
Evanston is about an hour and 20 minutes away from Salt Lake City.
Oh, from Salt Lake City. Okay, now I'm getting. All right. See, I was okay. Well, all right. So it's at the other end of the state, almost the bottom of the state.
Yeah.
There's really no easy way to get to Evanston from Sheridan, other than going through Casper and.
Yeah, no, that's true. There's no real easy way, but more importantly, there are lots of easy ways to get to Evanston from Salt Lake or Denver.
Exactly. Okay. And so I think can we go back in time, Blaine?
Sure.
Let's get in
Beginning?
what's that?
To the very beginning?
No, let's just go back in the Wayback Machine to when you and I first met. And
Okay.
I think we met at we may have met at Train Fest. We may have met at Springfield. And I asked you if you'd be interested in being interviewed on the podcast. And then we did that, and we ended up with a 2-part podcast, and we discovered that you and I love the philosophy of life.
Yes.
And we decided we were going to be brothers from another mother for the rest of our life.
Indeed, we have been. Yes.
Yes, exactly. And so you were at what position did you hold at ExactRail?
My title was vice president, but ExactRail was a small company, and typical of small companies everywhere. I think the title was probably pretentious. I wore a lot of hats, as did a lot of people that worked at ExactRail.
Right. And how long did you work there?
Well, I was there for 9 years. I would describe myself as being the longest employee of the company, and I would include the ownership in that. The ownership itself hasn't changed particularly. The owner, John Pastana, has owned it since its inception in 2007, but John's interest has changed through
Right.
time.
Yeah.
And there have been moments where he's been quite involved, and then there have been moments where he's been totally disconnected.
Right.
So if you take that into account, I was there from sometime close to the beginning until just recently, and I was unique in that regard.
Right. And I remember at some point you even possibly thought about going in a different direction in model railroading. Is that a fair statement?
I'm not sure what you're referring to. I don't know how to answer that.
Okay. I'm not sure what it is you want to make public.
Well, yeah, no, I just a few months before I left ExactRail, I did get involved in the Mountain States RPM meet.
Right.
And that was, in some sense, I suppose, anticipating change that I could see coming. And it was a way for me to continue to be connected in the hobby, which, by the way, is an industry that I love. I'm a lifelong enthusiast. I'll die an enthusiast, I'm sure. And it was a way for me to contribute. So
Right, and you had planned on building a layout where you were in the current home you were living in at the time.
That's true.
A Union Pacific layout, if I remember correctly.
And that's still the plan. Obviously, that's changed. We're in a different place as it is, but all of those same intentions have remained the same.
Right. So, and now, okay, so you're at ExactRail. You and I have become friends. ExactRail is a company that is in the forefront of freight car builders. And then I'm going along thinking, okay, well, Blaine's doing his thing and blah, 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 blah. And all of a sudden, the forums light up with, oh my God, the hobby's coming to an end. Blaine Hatfield has left ExactRail. And the whole time I'm thinking, I got to talk to Blaine. Because like without Blaine in the hobby, is there any point in going on even?
Yes, the answer is yes. There are still lots of reasons.
I mean, so many people were so. People were so exasperated. Maybe would exasperated be the right word, guys?
Concerned.
It seemed concerned, surprised. I know at White River we had meetings trying to decide did we want to go forward with our publications. And I said, well, let's see where Blaine lands and see what happens. And so we'll soldier on for now.
Okay.
Campbell's came to a complete slowdown. I mean, there's nobody working anymore.
Well, I know, and I heard that
I quit doing installs for a while. I stopped. I told customers I was sending stuff back. I didn't know what to do.
Well, I heard that Model Railroader and Craftsman were thinking of skipping a month. Just they just weren't going to produce a magazine for a month or two.
The Blaine Hatfield Memorial Month.
Yeah, so they could collect their thoughts and go forward from that point. And so how come can you tell us, where are you working now?
So I'm working at a company called Emit Technologies here in Sheridan. They are in the natural gas space.
Okay.
They manufacture ignition control systems and catalytic converters and other kinds of manufactured goods for natural gas engines. So it's quite a bit different than what I'm used to.
So was it kind of one of these things? One night you just kind of sat bolt upright in bed and said, I want to get into the catalytic converter game? I'm sure if you don't want to talk about why you left ExactRail, and I certainly understand that because whatever reasons it was you left ExactRail, it's like, how did these guys find you? I think that's a fair question. Did these guys happen? Were they, because you have quite a bit of formal education or higher education, and so was one of the things that you were educated in? I mean, I forget all the things. You have a BA in nuclear physics and a master's degree in paleontology and another degree in brain surgery and
speaks Italian.
That's actually true. I do speak Italian.
That much, yeah, exactly. That much. So how did you end up with these natural gas guys? Is some part of your education connected to, because what is the scientific thing you were? You were a biologist, no? You were in biology. Tell me when I'm getting close.
Well, to begin, I'm happy to talk about anything that you want to talk about. Feel free to ask questions and I'll answer them. Would like to believe that I'm an open book.
Okay.
Wait.
Oh, hang on. We got the Peanut Gallery wants to jump in here.
Blaine, don't tell him that he can talk about anything he wants, or we're going to sit here for the next 2 hours and listen to his life story. Yeah.
So yeah, but I mean, you were some sort of a scientist kind of guy in education, were you not?
Well, yeah, I have a degree in philosophy,
Right.
and I'm a semester shy of a degree in biochemistry.
Biochemistry. That's what it was. Exactly.
Yeah, it's not fair for me to take credit for that. I didn't finish, but yeah, c'est la vie.
So how did you? So the new company's called what?
Emit.
Yeah. Okay. So how did you end up at Emits? That can't be a secret.
No, it's no secret. I had been looking for work on and off,
Right.
and my wife and I had made the decision that we were small town people more than anything.
Okay.
That's where we're happy. It's where we want to be. Utah, you may or may not know, is the fastest growing state in the country.
All right. I did not know that.
Yeah, it's just explosive growth. And the particular area where we lived, which was along the Wasatch Front, was said to double in population in about 15 years' time, if I recall. So a significant growth curve.
Right.
And we had just made the decision that it was no longer a place that we wanted to be.
Right.
Given, well, yeah. So
like you just didn't want to be part of urban expansion, and it
Right.
just wasn't your thing. Because everybody wants to concentrate on their own personal happiness. So no matter how in tuned you were, or how much you enjoyed model railroading, and how much you enjoyed your job at ExactRail, which it was obvious that you enjoyed the whole model railroading and freight car, building quality models. Obviously, if it was going to be in the middle of a high urban area, it wasn't one happiness wasn't going to outweigh another happiness.
Yeah. So we identified a couple of different places where we felt like we would like to live. And one of them was Sheridan. And I applied, from time to time, I would look at job listings in those areas and apply. When I applied to the job at Emit, I had never before heard of the company. I was applying to a job in a marketing position.
Okay.
So a bit removed from my skill set. At ExactRail I may have held the title of vice president, but I think in actuality my job description was a better fit for a new product manager or a product manager of some kind. So they responded the next morning. I sent my resume in at about 10 o'clock that evening. By midnight, I had already exchanged emails maybe 4 or 5 times with their business development manager, and had a interview the next morning, top of the morning,
Wow.
by phone. And then shortly thereafter drove up and had an in-person interview, and with each step I took, the more enthusiastic I became about the opportunity.
Okay.
And it ended up being the case that they extended me an offer that was not at all related to the position that I applied to.
Wow.
So, yeah, I mean, my trip up was eventful. It's a 9-hour drive, and I had never been to Sheridan before. And so, as you'd expect with a drive that's that long, you don't really know where you are, particularly in a state with as little population as Wyoming. There are vast stretches of just emptiness.
Yes.
And my car broke down
Holy moly.
on my way in. Yeah. Apparently the
Your car broke
vacuum pump, the chain to the vacuum pump broke, and that put pressure on the timing chain, which is intended to be a non-wear item. It's not something that would break or
Right.
something that you
Right.
check. And that broke.
And
So
then you started to lose altitude.
And then I started to lose altitude. was in the middle of the Bighorn National Forest. It was 10 o'clock at night. I had no cell reception. I had no idea where I was relative. I knew generally, but relative to where I needed to be going, I didn't have any idea. And I thought, oh my gosh, like what am I going to do?
Right.
But the third car that passed stopped. And it was two good old boys in a truck. They had just finished hunting. They had a big stag of a deer draped in the back of the truck and in the back seat full of guns. And I climbed in the back of the truck. And by the time we got into the nearest town...
Did they play banjo?
Right? By the time
Oddly enough, as they came down the road, you hear...
Honestly, it was great. I was probably stranded roadside for like 20 minutes. I mean, it just wasn't very long at all. By the time I got into the nearest town, which was like 30 miles from where I was at, they had already called a tow truck and had it started. We met en route with the tow truck, and I went and picked my car up. And when I got back into Buffalo, so not my destination, but the nearest town, mind you, Buffalo is a pretty small town. There's just not a lot going on there. And at that point, it was almost midnight, and I had no idea where I would sleep or what I was going to do. My interview was at 8 a.m. the next morning. So the driver of the tow truck dropped me off at the gas station in town. And I was trying to get my bearings and ended up hitchhiking. Effectively, the woman that worked at the gas station gave me a ride from Buffalo to Sheridan, which for her was a 60-mile round trip. So I rolled into my interview right on time, despite all of this, and by then I was thoroughly convinced that it was meant to happen. So,
well, yeah. Now, there's only one part of this story that we need to clarify before we go on. I doubt if anybody else has thought of this, but this is just the way I operate. So you and your wife, one of the places you had picked out to go to where it was a small town place was Sheridan, Wyoming.
Uh-huh.
And yet you'd never been there.
Right. Right.
So is this, did this involve a map and pins and a blindfold, or?
It always does for me. No, I mean, Google's a pretty powerful tool. We got a pretty good sense of what the place was like.
Right.
Had I been out there for my interview and not liked Sheridan, then we would have declined the offer and pursued other ones. But in terms of what we were looking for, Sheridan pretty much had it all. There were other places we were looking at too, but the opportunities and the stars aligned with Sheridan, and it's working out. And I love it.
And by have it all, do you mean like a gas station, grocery store?
Yeah, I mean Sheridan's a small town for sure, but it's not so small that it doesn't have a Walmart.
Okay, and population of Sheridan, Wyoming is roughly
17,000, I believe.
Okay, so that's kind of a neat.
Salute.
Yeah, yeah. So
you work by the airport.
Yeah. So EMIT has a number of different buildings. Our electronics assembly is near the airport, but the engineering building, which is where I'm at, is on the other side of town.
And how do you spell EMIT? Is it E-M-I-T? Is that?
Yep.
EMIT. Okay. And
if you want to look it up, it's EMIT Technologies Inc.
Okay, EMIT Technologies Inc. And what do I need? So do I need to look it up, or have you got that under control?
No, I looked it already.
You got it under control?
I want to know how many times you went to Cowboy Classic rides.
Cowboy Classic rides?
Yeah, it's just down the street from the EMIT.
I want to know about
missing out.
I want to know about. I saw on his Facebook page, like the first day or the first week or something, he was flying around in a jet.
Yeah, so Emmet has a private jet, a corporate jet, and
And
that's
they let you
yeah,
fly it.
we fly the jet.
You
yeah,
do-
so
you just
my
jump.
first
You
day
just
on the job.
you just jump behind the controls and away you go.
Yep.
So you probably went to Fort Worth, right?
So in that case, no, we went and met with a customer just outside of Houston.
Okay.
All right. So now, okay. So let's get back to ExactRail. And so you've been in ExactRail for 9 years. You're a lifelong. You're a lifer when it comes to model railroading.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have any sense of your, I don't know, let's go with stature in the hobby? Because as Tony says, you're well liked in the hobby, and it seemed, and I remember from our last conversation that people came to rely on ExactRail to build specific models. Did you have any sense of that your departure was going to create a lot of hand wringing?
No.
And have you been in contact with people, the rivet counters? I remember you and I had a very good conversation. That was the beginning of my thought process. It was one of the first times I verbalized my thought process on the air about how rivet counters are in fact a smaller part of the hobby, but yet they are the ones that have pushed the hobby forward and the quality of models forward. Did you have any encounters with those people that you had regularly talked to when you were at ExactRail?
Yeah, naturally, I made a number of very good friends by virtue of being able to work for a model train manufacturer, and I have been able to keep in touch with some of them, and hope to continue to do so.
And when exactly did you start with Emmet?
I believe my start date was on the 20th of October.
Okay, so not that long ago. We are recording this at the end of 2017, so approximately 2 months ago.
Mm-hmm.
And you've already moved the family and got a house and everything?
Well, we're currently renting. We're looking right now for property.
Okay. Do you sense that you'll build a house or buy a house that's already built? Because I'm only interested in the basement aspect. Like, I don't really care what's everything. Everything above the basement is of no consequence.
Of no consequence at all.
No.
No, we're most likely will build. That said, we're open to the possibility of finding a home here, but it's got to be the right home, and finding a home that can accommodate a basement layout is sometimes easier said than done.
Yeah, exactly. Building a house. Yeah, building a basement is the ideal way to go for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I did. Now, you talked about urban sprawl. I don't think I should leave out of the conversation. I've been in the house that I'm in now for 33 years, and urban sprawl in my particular neighborhood has been a problem. In those 33 years, there's been 9 new houses built. So, I mean, I'm just like, I'm crazy here because the urban sprawl is going nuts where I am.
Wow. There you go.
So what's that? 33 years. That's approximately, it's about 3-4 people a year that have come into my neighborhood. So it's crazy. So you're it's a couple months. You're relatively happy with the change and everything. You're out of the. What's the first thing you noticed about not being in the model railroad industry? What's different? Like when you were in the model railroad industry, we talked about how, people would, it was hard to separate your hobby from the industry, and, people would kind of, track you down and, can you build this freight car? And I remember conversations where you talked about, well, this is great, but only actually 8 people want this freight car.
Yeah, and another problem with, there's a lot of benefits to working for a model train manufacturer, but there are downsides as well. And one of them, it's tough, believe it or not, to have friends that are enthusiasts, because the conversation is always about what project, we can do for them.
Right.
And there's only so much of that a relationship can take before
Yeah.
So yeah, a couple of things. One of the first things that I noticed, was that the word you used?
Mm-hmm.
It's surprisingly difficult to be in touch with everything that's new and ongoing, I find. My current job is such that I'm really busy.
Right.
And, there are announcements. The way that manufacturers announce products, the way that they make that information available to the public, means that as a member of the modeling community, I have to be pretty active in my effort to be keyed in and to know what's going on, far more than I anticipated.
Right.
I'd say that's one of the things that I've noticed.
Yeah, like when you were in the hobby and in the manufacturing, you were pretty much in tune to what was going on in the hobby. And now that you're not employed by the hobby, now it's much harder to stay in tune with what's new and what's happening.
Right. And that's not to say that there aren't really great avenues to do that. There are. Just from my perspective, I just feel suddenly well removed.
Right. Tony, would you like to tell him one of those great avenues to stay up on products, or would you like me to tell him?
I knew this was coming.
Okay.
There are ways to keep up with what's new in the hobby. Yes, indeed. In fact, we have a new way to do that. Our every other Friday news podcast here on the AML network, in addition to that monthly magazine I put out.
Exactly. So you've got Model Railroad News. One day, Tony and I ended up, Shane Mason, who's with us here, our young gun. We call him the young gun because he's just 20. He's about to turn 21. Are you excited about that, Shane?
Not that it really makes a huge difference because I don't drink or anything, but sure.
It'll make a difference to me. Trust me. You'll notice that I talk to you differently.
Well, we're just getting closer to that. 1 year closer to what that?
Yeah, exactly.
What'd you say? What was my goal? I had to make it to what? And you want to see me at what? 60 or 30?
I want to stay alive long enough to at least get you to 50 because I'm dying to see what happens.
Gotcha.
You're like a good book. So, anyways, we have Model Railroad News, which Tony Cook is. So yes, so Shane Mason, our young gun, he was excited to tell me that somehow. How did you two meet, Tony and Shane? How did you guys meet again?
I found his YouTube channel.
Okay.
I was looking for something one night or surfing around YouTube, and suddenly here's this kid talking about DCC or something or another and mentioned Kansas City N-Track. Like, wait, Kansas City, where's he at? And I emailed him from there, I think, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then
way back at the beginning or the end of 2016.
Yes, and Shane started telling me about this guy, Tony Cook, who is the editor of Model Road News, and then Shane started to do some reviews for him, and then I kept saying, well, we got to get Tony on the podcast. Well, then we got Tony on the podcast, and Tony's got a great radio voice. So then anyways, Tony suggested a few months ago, he said, how about if I was to do a product news? And I said, sure, so long as I don't have to do anything. Because here's what I like about podcasting. I like talking to people, and I don't mind making the podcast so they're listenable, but beyond that, that's about as interested as I am. I don't really like collecting information. I don't like making notes. I don't like keeping track of anything. I just like talking to people. So then Tony has this great product news podcast. So, Blaine, I highly recommend that every other week you try to listen to that, because everything you want to know about model railroading that's new in the hobby, that's where you're going to find it in about a short 12-minute section, and it's really easy to do.
That's awesome.
It is, and it's been very popular. And he does an excellent job. He's just one of these guys that can keep track of everything. So that's okay. So there you go, Tony. So that's exactly what Blaine is talking about. it's very difficult for people to keep track of what's new in the hobby. You are doing the world a huge service.
No, I wouldn't go that far.
All right, Tony, now you can leave.
Oh, okay. All right. I'm done. It is, as Blaine says, though, it's so different. I think today when you look back at, you can look at old editions of the Walther's catalogs from the 70s and 80s, and very little changes from year to year. And yet now you can't keep up with the amount of product coming out. What goes on in 6 months is maybe 6 years worth of product releases, 30, 40 years ago.
Blaine, I have a great question for you.
Shoot.
And this is going to play right off what you just said, Tony. And I want Bruce and Shane and everybody to jump in here on their opinion. Blaine, this is a great question. This is something that is starting to intrigue me about the hobby. The more I interview people, the more intrigued I become. This podcast is probably one of the best things I ever did in the hobby, for my own personal self anyways. I am fascinated by the fact I have Shane Wilson, who's the president of ScaleTrains.com, and he's very forthcoming. He's very much like you. He's very willing to talk. Lots of people are, but very friendly, very nice, easy to talk to. And I am fascinated. I want to know, when you were in the industry, which was just a few months ago, I am fascinated by, like what Tony says, the number of products that come out. So I am convinced beyond a shadow of a doubt that this hobby is growing like crazy, primarily because of the digital age, because there are so many products coming out. How do these companies, the hobby must be growing like crazy because people are buying all this stuff. Do you get any kind of a sense of this? I'm not really doing very good at wording this question, but I don't really remember any question that I ever worded that well anyways. But do you get a sense of, ExactRail makes a particular freight car, and they sell X number of them. And ScaleTrains.com makes a freight car, and they sell X number of them. And Tangent makes a freight car, and they sell X number of them. And it's like all these companies seem to be able to exist financially.
Mm-hmm.
So is it do you get a sense that the hobby's growing or anything like that? And how do all these companies manage to get a piece of the pie?
Well, if I were to guess, I would say that the hobby is retracting. Now, I don't know. And so that should make for a lively point of conversation between us.
Yes.
But I do think the hobby is contracting. What I think is changing about the hobby is that hobbyists are becoming much more sophisticated, generally speaking. I don't believe that the hobby has the sort of broad appeal that it did in the 50s and 60s when it seemed like everybody had a model train set,
right,
maybe in their basement. One of the things that I enjoyed quite a lot about working for a model train manufacturer is anytime someone would ask me what I did, and I would say this, they would always respond inevitably with, oh my gosh, my dad, my grandpa, my uncle loves trains, right?
Right.
But it's much less that you hear my niece or my nephew. So I think there is generally fewer people that are participating in the hobby. That said, I'm not saying that the hobby isn't vibrant and well. I think what's changing is the demographic of participants is changing considerably. Where at one time it was a broad base of very casual enthusiasts, and now it's becoming a much more sophisticated hobby. And I wrote about this in my blogs on ExactRail. I do believe that model railroading is a very sophisticated hobby, and it's one that its participants should be proud of. I can't think of a comparison, a hobby that requires such a broad set of talents to be able to execute well. I mean, everything from the carpentry to create the bench work to the knowledge of history and how particular industries and all of this comes together in a geographic, and then obviously the artistic element to it. It's really a wonderful hobby. So yeah, I mean, I think things are shifting, and I think by and large, some people panic way too much.
Yeah.
You know, the brick and mortar hobby store, that is changing, but that doesn't mean that the hobby's dying. You look at any industry in commerce, and it's shifted radically because of the internet in the last 20 years, radically, right? And model train and hobby stores really aren't outside of trends which are pretty much normal everywhere.
Right. Exactly. Okay.
So I agree and I disagree, I suppose, is the answer.
Well, you're gonna have to pick one. Well, that's a very good point. I mean, I'm interested in what Bruce and Tony and Shane have to think about that, because we've got a wide range of people here. We've got Shane, who's 20, who's just crazy about the hobby, and Bruce is my age, and Tony's been in the publishing part of it for quite some time. We've had some great discussions about that. So my own particular view is that the hobby is growing because it's so much more available to people. You can now sit in your basement or in your house, in your office, in your house, in your pajamas, and you don't have to go to a division meet to interact with other model railroaders. So I believe it's brought people into the hobby that way.
Well, let me add one more thought to this, and then the others can respond. If there are challenges to the hobby and its growth going forward, I think some of those challenges relate to the fact that trains are just less accessible than they were in the past. It happens to be the case that if I'm out photographing equipment, police come and talk to me.
Yeah.
And you have to explain yourself, or concerned business owners or something like that. And that's something that I really wish would change. I think people that participate in this hobby, for the most part, do it with the best intentions, and in some ways and in some places, a person can feel criminalized.
Yes,
I suppose,
yeah.
for taking an interest in trains, and it would be nice to see that change, in my opinion.
Yeah. Okay. Before we go on to these guys, the only thing I would add to that is I don't necessarily have to be out photographing trains and police come and talk to me.
All right.
All right, Bruce, what did you think about what he said?
Oh, it's true. I mean, the access to looking at trains has changed. A lot of the consolidation to these big railroad companies, you're seeing less and less trackage. And then as far as the hobby's concerned, it's definitely there is a change going on, because I noticed it in talking with the guys at work. The amount of, obviously at Microtrains, the amount of people they used to have there, and now they're a very small operation. And Campbell's is the same way. We've gone from they were talking about every week having like a $5,000 order, and now we're down to less than that every month. And it's just people are probably, the money issue is probably a big issue because of the cost of things. You don't have a lot of spending money. You're paying for food and rent and everything else, and there's not a lot of extra cash to go out and buy a $25 or a $35 freight car. And you look for the good deals. Go to the shows and go online to see if you can get a good deal on a $200 or a $300 locomotive that has DCC and sound. Right. So I think people are being a little more specific about what they buy and what they get. And,
okay.
But there's definitely a group of people that are not out there. They're hidden. They don't want to be known. I'm just thinking about those 15 guys, that story I keep saying. There's 15 guys in Medford that we know nothing about, but we know they spend close to $5,000 a month down at a hobby store in California.
Right.
And it's like, these guys are lone wolves. They don't want to be publicized where they are with trains, and I think there's a lot of people like that are buying and following the hobby, but they're just not out into the mainstream where we could account for them.
Okay. Shane, what are your thoughts on what we've just talked about?
I don't know. I can kind of go both ways on the hobby, whether it's getting bigger or smaller. But honestly, I think it's getting more specific. I don't think as many people are just going out and buying stuff for a 4x8. There's a lot of guys like I don't remember the fella's name. Lionel, me and you talked to him a while back, but there's a fella that does maybe his name was Jason something, but he just does weathering.
What
was his name?
Quinn.
Jason Quinn. That's
Yeah.
it. Thank you. I knew his first name. But, I think a lot of guys are really starting to hone in on what they do well. There's a ESU's got a page for a Facebook page for their ESU products, and then they have a Facebook page they manage for installation stuff and whatnot. And all the guys that work on there that do install stuff and custom writing stuff and whatnot, and a lot of the guys that do scratch building stuff, I don't think you see as much of the general building of a large railroad. A lot of guys are really focusing on what they like, whether it's scratch building or for myself, it's installs and sound recording. So I don't think the hobby is necessarily getting smaller. I think it's getting more diverse and more specific. And I think that's where you see a lot of the rivet counters and a lot of the guys that are wanting specific models that are with specific details and stuff like that.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I like that. And Tony, what is your take on all of our discussion about that?
I think that Blaine really hit that on the nose saying sophisticated, because I do think when the hobby had a broader base, going back to kind of that post-World War II and the decades after, it was a more general thing. You set up, again, a 4x8, the train went round and round, you built some structures maybe for it, and it was a much simpler pursuit. And as Blaine has stated, and as he well knows from what they produced at ExactRail, that market is so different now, that it's the name alone, ExactRail. It has to be perfect. It's got to be this. It's no longer just an F unit, a boxcar, and a caboose running in circles endlessly. That I think it is a lot more sophisticated. So those people that are involved in the hobby, it's a much different thing than it was.
Yeah, that's all great. Those are all great opinions and suggestions. You see, Blaine, that's why I wanted to talk to you again, because you have such thoughtful answers.
Well, I don't know about that, but I would like to say that as an industry, one of the things that I think we should be doing better is recognizing that the barrier to entry into this hobby is quite high.
Yes.
There's no one that walks into a hobby store for the first time, picks up a model train kit, if we can call it that,
right,
and has an operating model railroad the next day, right?
Yes.
Whereas it's so easy to do that with other hobbies. I can buy a drone, I can fly it, within minutes, and the way we bill ourselves as manufacturers, the way we talk to people as consumers, I think there needs to be a much greater appreciation for the fact that to execute well in this hobby requires often decades of experience. And that may speak why, to Shane's point, why some people are becoming very specific in their pursuits is because you can, right? I mean, the wealth and breadth of talent required to execute a really, really faithful model railroad is extraordinary. But a person can come into the hobby and choose something specific and feel like they're doing exceptional work, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot to this hobby.
There is, and it's like that goes to a point I made some time ago on some particular podcast. I said, I made the observation that I think one of the things I've learned from this podcast is I think that generally model railroaders are fairly intelligent people and good people, and people that are, Tony and I have talked about this, that kind of obsessive where, because you know, in order to achieve the ultimate goal, you've got to have some stick-to-itiveness.
Mm-hmm.
You got to stay with it. You got to, you got to work at it. You got to, and maybe that's part of the dream of the hobby is there's that, that goal of, when you finally get the layout to a certain point. I mean, Bruce, you're a club guy and you really enjoy your club. And I guess, that the club gives you that, avenue of satisfaction.
Yeah, it's the focus there is more to the hobby, where if I wasn't close to a club, I would have a layout in my garage right now if that was the case.
Yeah, and you're right.
All my energy and my creativity is being focused on the club's layout.
Yeah, and Blaine's right. Of course, the hobby doesn't entail so much. I mean, it was on something I was talking about to somebody in one of the podcasts. I mean, it turned me into a journalist. It taught me journalism. It's taught me podcasting. It increased my photography skills. It increased my writing skills. It increased my airbrushing skills. I mean, it just it gives you so much that there, that's where the secret of the hobby is. And I think personally, I think what's happening is people who are looking for some way to express themselves are now finding model railroading online on the internet and getting involved because they go, wow, this is cool. Yeah, I'd like to do that. And it's bringing a new group of people that are excited about it. And yeah, like Blaine says, I think it's very difficult to achieve something quickly, but it's it lends itself to people that are kind of put your head down and get the job done kind of thing.
And I think it's a pro and a con. And one of my favorite old companies is a great poster child for that, and that's Tyco. Tyco was tremendous for the hobby because you could walk into a Sears or, department stores, discounters, and for $30 there's a train set. But it also was one of the worst things for the hobby because the stuff didn't run that well. It wasn't that good a quality. There wasn't enough to engage you about it. So it's a give and take. Like, wow, if we just had that again, that would be great because look at all the train sets it sold and all the people that got in the hobby. But how many of them stayed? I would guess for as many people as like a Tyco train set lured into the hobby, they also quickly were frustrated with it and didn't get the satisfaction. I think the product's out now and the level the hobby has achieved now is a much more, as you say, there's that higher threshold of getting into it. I can't just walk into a store and for $30 come home with a circle of track and a train, but your enjoyment and what you're going to learn and what you're going to get out of it is so much more now than it was.
And if I jump in, that's part of the reason why I got involved in Mountain States RPM.
We're going to get to that.
Are we?
Yes.
Okay.
That's the next step. I got one more question about ExactRail, and then we'll stop talking about ExactRail and that part of your life, and we're going to move on to the RPM meet.
Okay, excellent. Let's do that.
Okay. So the last question I have about ExactRail is, so they bought Pelle Solberg's layout?
Yes. Well, okay, yes. Caveat asterisks, but we can get into that. What's the question?
They bought it? They bought it and they're moving it all the way over there and they're installing it in their display room, or what are they doing with it?
So the company that bought the layout is actually called Train Life, which is a sister company of ExactRail. And for what it's worth, it's a distinction without a difference, but it is a technical distinction. The people that ExactRail employs are also the people that work at Train Life.
Okay.
Right? The person that pulls your product and packs your product, if you order from ExactRail's website or Train Life's website, is the same person. The people that respond to your email messages and the ownership is all the same. So, but technically it was Train Life that purchased the layout. Yeah, and they moved it in. I've seen the layout. It's a beautiful layout. They actually received the layout after I had left the company.
Okay. And what
Yeah.
exactly is Train Life? It's just like it's an online place to buy stuff. Is that what it is?
Well, yeah.
Short answer, because I'm not that interested. I'm more interested in your RPM meet. So
Okay. Yeah. So Train Life was a forum that was started. John Pastana saw an opportunity in social media and the rise of Facebook and Twitter, and he felt like some part of that was applicable to model railroading. And so Train Life was started as a forum, and it failed miserably.
right.
And after a couple of years, really, of it just sort of floating out there in the ethers, John and the CEO of ExactRail started to have conversations about how they could monetize it. And so they just flipped it into an online model train store.
Okay.
And again, it was that bought the layout. But,
All right. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. So all right. So we had a discussion last night, and you're going to be an integral part of this discussion, because we started talking about Sunshine Models.
Okay.
And Martin Lofton, who owns Sunshine Models. Do you know that name at all?
I do. Yeah, very well.
And we started talking because one of the first things, I have this little portable digital recorder that Shane the Young Gun helps me run, called an H5 Zoom, and I did a lot of interviews at the Chicagoland RPM meet, which was the original RPM meet, which used to be in Naperville, Illinois, and I thought for 20 years it was Napierville, but that took me 20 years to learn how to pronounce it. And was that not the original RPM meet?
Yes.
And was it not started by Martin Lofton?
I believe it was, but I'm not sure I can say specifically.
No, I don't think anybody's sure yet. And the point I was going to make is, it seems like, to me, when we were doing, I forget what podcast we were doing, but we started talking about it, and it suddenly dawned on me, like, there are RPM meets everywhere, and they're wildly popular, and I think it behooves us not to forget that Martin Lofton of Sunshine Models was the guy that started this model railroad phenomenon called the RPM meet.
Yeah.
Because it is a phenomenon in the hobby. I mean, there's RPM meets everywhere now.
Yeah, and I would posit that the rise in RPM meets really has to do with the sophistication of the hobby, the barriers to entry. This might be an unfair dichotomy, the way I paint this, and I recognize that I'm making statements in the broadest possible terms, and please forgive me for that. But the way I view traditional train shows is that they're primarily sites of commerce. When I walk through the door of a train show, I'm met with vendors selling me things.
Right.
And if I want to attend forums or do after-hour activities, layout tours, or whatnot, it requires a level of familiarity to even know that those things are available to me that I don't think the average person walking through the door is aware of. Whereas precisely the opposite is true of an RPM meet. RPM meets are learning communities. Often it's the case when I walk into an RPM meet, I'm able to find 5 or 6 clinic rooms, right?
Right.
That are teaching sort of like small classrooms of some particular subject or another before I'm able to find commerce, right? The vendor room. And I think this is important. I think people should pay attention to this because the growth is speaking to a need, right? People, to be successful in this hobby, they need places where they can, learning communities where they can come, they can grow, they can interact with like-minded people. And I think that's what RPM meets. I think that's what they speak to very, very well. And I would suggest that it would be a good thing for the hobby if RPM meets weren't viewed as the kind of places that people graduate to, but rather the kinds of places that people are born into. Because the breadth and the width of the hobby is such that you really need those kinds of networks to not be frustrated. You need good, solid networks that can get you started off right, that can inspire you with fantastic modeling, and show you something that you hope to obtain. And I think that standard train shows can do that, but I think RPM meets have sort of distilled that down to its essence. It's buying things is secondary at an RPM meet.
Yes,
I think there's a lot of value there.
I think you're right. Like our RPM meets are about, and primarily there's no judging. It's about bringing your what you've done and showing it and getting opinions and everything else. And it's like, and it just dawned on me when we were talking, like, there's such an integral part of today's hobby. And if one man, in fact, did start it, Martin Lofton, I think it behooves us not to forget that.
Yeah.
So tell us about your RPM meet.
So Mountain States RPM was started 2 years ago. I was integral to its conception and startup. Given that I was working at ExactRail, I remained sort of behind the scenes.
Right.
I think for an RPM meet to have credibility among the prototype modelers, it shouldn't look or feel too commercial. And so, it was my intent and my hope to get something started in the Intermountain area where there was nothing. I got involved with a fantastic individual named Adam Eastman. He led the affair. Unfortunately, Adam Eastman passed away unexpectedly. And in his absence, I stepped forward and carried it forward for another year. And honestly, I'm happy to do so. We have it in Evanston, Wyoming. There's railroad facilities in Evanston that are just beautiful. It's a wonderful venue. It's held in the old engine shops that have been restored really well. And then the city is in the process of restoring the roundhouse. And although we weren't able to secure the roundhouse space for the 2018 year, we'll be trying to secure that in the years thereafter. So does it have a Facebook, like a website, any kind of thing like that? Yeah, it does. It has a Facebook page. And I'm in the process of getting a website together, and prior to the 2018 year show, I'll have that all up and running. So this is your first year running it, because unfortunately this other gentleman passed away. Yeah, it will be my second year running it. Okay. And are you enjoying that? Like, you sound like you're enjoying it quite a bit. Yeah, I love it. I absolutely love it. Last year there was significant growth in terms of our attendance, and we're expecting 100% growth this year. We had people travel from, Oregon, California, Washington to attend. People came in from Texas and Kansas. Spring Creek trains came in from Nebraska. We had an attendee come down from Ontario, Canada. Oh, yeah. So we had great reception in that respect, and a lot of compliments in terms of the quality of the venue and the quality of the speakers. So it's something that I'm really looking forward to again. And I believe, I don't want to speak out of turn, but I believe our friend Tony Cook will be coming and speaking this year as well. Really? The Tony Cook.
That's correct. That's correct. I've heard that rumor. So all this talk he's had about how it's expanding and gotten bigger and better every year, this is probably, over the cliff after I make my appearance. But yes, yeah.
So you just had it then in September of 2017.
Yes.
And so will it be the second weekend of September again in 2018?
Yes.
And what kind of attendance did you have last year?
I don't recall our exact attendance numbers. They were something in the order of 50 or 60 people.
Okay.
Which, the first year, I think they had 8 paid attendees. So
right.
Very, very small. This year, because we're co-sponsoring the event with an OPSIG group called the Great Basin Getaway.
Yes.
That group alone will bring 80 attendees, and then there's the normal set of attendees that will be coming, plus whatever growth is organic. So it should be, something in the order of 150 people this year, which would make it a larger meet for RPM meets.
Yes.
St. Louis meet is probably the biggest RPM meet in the country. Probably it is the biggest RPM meet in the country. I believe their 2017 numbers had 500 attendees.
Right. Okay. I believe in Chicago, the one I just was at. In what month is this? I was there in November or October. I don't remember now. It was the fall of 2017, and they got just over 300 people, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I don't think it's something that we should just, by the way, that word dichotomy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just a little bit outside the rules. That's a bit too big for me. Yeah, I try to stick to 2-syllable words, if you don't mind. I have a vocabulary of about 27 words, so I can't chew up a lot of syllables in one word. I can't do it. So I don't think we should just pass by the fact that you had a meet in September of 2017 that you feel you had 50 or 60 attendees, and you had people from all over, all those states and places that you mentioned. Like, what was it about this particular meet that would draw people from so far? Like, what is it about? How did your meet become such that people from so many places would show up? Do you have did that question make sense?
I don't know. Some of those people came to participate in the Fremo layout. That, it's common that RPM meets have a Fremo layout there in operation, and some of those people came for that. Our speakers are noted historians. One of them was Brian Rutherford. He's a well-known railroad historian and photographer, was the editor of CTC Board magazine. Rick Selby came and spoke. He led the Microsoft Train Sim project.
Yes, I know Rick very well.
And then there were others. And I mean, again, I think that's the appeal of RPM meets is it's not the same vendors. There are people that are coming from far and from wide, and it's interesting to hear what these people have to say. And I would like to think that that's what, contributed to the growth.
Yeah. And so I'm fascinated by the fact that all these RPM meets call themselves RPM meets, because there's no organized governing body of RPM meets.
Yeah.
There's no set of rules and regulations to follow.
No free trips.
No what?
No free trips.
Yeah. You have to get that in there.
You were going there.
I wasn't going there. I'm fascinated by the fact that these. I am absolutely I get something in my head, and I'm fascinated that one man decided to start these things, and they've become a very integral part of the hobby right now. I mean, there's RPM meets in St. Louis and and Philadelphia, and Cocoa Beach has one every year that's very popular, and Chicago, and yours, and there's one in California. Like, I think and I know Eric Hansman is very into many of the RPM meets, and he's got to get him back on and talk to him about it. But I mean, it's a fascinating part of the hobby. And like, did you guys just all of a sudden, your friend, what did your friend's name was again?
Adam Eastman.
Adam Eastman. Did you and Adam just one day kind of wake up, bolt upright, and go, "Hey, let's have an RPM meet"?
I don't remember how we started talking about it. I'm reaching back. Adam Eastman was a great guy for the job. That's for sure. He
Right.
Was a PhD history professor. He was teaching at Utah Valley University, and his degree and his interest in history brought a fresh sort of take on railroading, and he could speak to things from a historical perspective that tied things together really well. So to have him really get behind that and push, I thought was ideal. And to carry it on after Adam is certainly an honor.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it sounds like it's an honor to you more than anything.
Yeah. You talk about how they grow and how one man started this a number of years ago and how they're everywhere. And again, I think that's something that's a trend that people should pay attention to. In many ways, I think it's a response to traditional train meets. I believe that the NMRA has an awful lot to offer, and they've done wonderful things for the hobby. But if you look at the NMRA, it's a highly structured enterprise. There are officers, there are regions, there are groups, and the standards by which a person can operate are in an NMRA railroad are quite rigorous.
Yes.
And the concepts behind RPM and Fremo, they're a response to that. Right?
Yes. We have definite views here on the old AML podcast about that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I just think it's something that people should pay attention to, right? I mean, it's a group of people that's saying, hey, this is our hobby, and maybe we don't want to participate, use our hobby in such a structured way.
Yeah, exactly.
Thus popularity.
Bruce, would you like to add something here?
No. I'm not.
We often talk about and I'm assuming, Blaine, you've heard every single episode that we've ever produced. So
Many times.
Yeah, many times. So we often talk about how the NMRA seems to be completely out of touch with today's model railroader.
Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know that. I think the hobby owes a lot to the NMRA.
Absolutely, there's no two ways about it.
Yeah, but I think that there's something to be said when such a large segment of the hobby is trying to do something different.
Yes, that's a very good way of putting it. Shane, are you still there? Shane, has Shane left?
Sorry, I was bruised out there.
Yeah, okay. I kind of figured you were because you were awful quiet. So what do you think of everything that a young Mr. Hadfield has set up till now? I mean, you went to the St. Louis prototype RPM meet, and you were pretty excited about it.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a totally different atmosphere from, like he said, going to a train show where you're hit with vendors and a handful of layouts and that's it. Where you go to these RPM meets and really I tell people, going to the St. Louis one was my first one, but after going to that one, I told people, I said, the best way to get a lot out of an RPM meet is to put a lot into it, talk to a lot of people, interact with a lot of people, ask a lot of questions. That's really, like he said, those RPM meets are just totally built around sharing information and learning from other guys. just that St. Louis one alone was phenomenal. Between talking to the scale trains guys, all Kimberly and all those folks that were there, the Proto Throttle guys. That's where I met Scott Thornton and those fellas from the Proto Throttle.
Right.
I think Blaine and I actually took a selfie at the St. Louis RPM, if I remember correctly. It should be on the page, but
I believe you're right.
but yeah, no, those RPM meets are just they're totally different from just what they consider your normal train show to be. And I think a lot of people are gravitating towards it, especially, again, you talk about those specialty groups, the Weathering, DCC, the guys who are doing something very specific in history, such as like, a lot of steam era guys, or even folks like Don Ball, who's doing 1890. It's just an area of model railroading that's not super well covered by most manufacturers and mainstream modeling, to say. So I think that the RPMs really open the door to a lot more of the hobby than just buying stuff, seeing a couple layouts running, and going home.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. I mean, I think that's a great way of putting it. I mean, Blaine, my personal feeling about the NMRA is, and feel free to agree or disagree. I want the NMRA to flourish and thrive. But I personally feel that they've lost touch with the general hobby. And pretty much what you and the opinions you expressed, like if there's this many people wanting to have RPM meets rather than divisional meets, then, you kind of got to stop, they kind of got to stop and go, well, wait a minute here. And a big part of the RPM meets is judging of the models is not key. There's no contests. I'm assuming you didn't have a contest at yours.
No.
Like,
yeah.
I'm fascinated by the fact, and I've stumbled onto this, is the fact that all of these RPM meets seem to run in conjunction with each other, following a loosely set rules, and the rules are generally, there's no rules other than it's about bringing your models, and it's about the modeling, not about the vendors, not about judging. It's about the modeling and about clinics, and people seem to enjoy them so much more. Now, I think it goes to what you said. The hobby's becoming more specific, if anything.
Yeah, so 2 points, I suppose. Again, I think the NMRA has done wonderful things for the hobby, because when the NMRA came about, it was modelers that were building models of trains. And, that's a guy in a basement with strip wood gluing stuff together. And again, I'm simplifying things a lot, and I know that. But the NMRA really created the conditions for the possibility of a hobby, right?
Right.
By standardizing things. Because when you have a working standard, now manufacturers can start a business with the promise that there's a market for this gauge or that gauge. And so, I love the NMRA. The NMRA is where a lot of people find a home. And the NMRA allows for a lot of RPM kinds of meets insofar as they provide insurance and that sort of stuff that RPM meets would otherwise, because of their loose structure, struggle to cover. So, I want to be careful about how I talk about the NMRA and how I talk about RPM meets. But I will say, and this, no offense, but from the point of view of a manufacturer and somebody who has developed projects, I found that the fidelity of ExactRail products and the kinds of details that we were hoping to push as an organization was encumbered by NMRA standards that are antiquated. Weight standards and those kinds of things were often predicated on rolling stock that had plastic wheels and plastic axles and horn hook couplers. And as the hobby has gotten better, where metal wheels are now the standard, metal axles are often well on their way to becoming the standard. most model train manufacturers offer KD couplers or KD equivalent couplers, OEM, on their equipment. The standards have not been progressive. And so as I'm working to develop a higher caliber model, there are enough people who look so carefully at NMRA weight standards, who look so carefully at other standards at the NMRA, that it actually becomes a barrier to creating more faithfully accurate products. And I would really like to see that change.
Yeah. Like you want. I mean, to me, I think it's just a matter of somehow the NMRA has gotten itself stuck 30 years ago, and they don't seem to be able to advance forward. Like, to me, like I'm a great fan of the new digital world. I'm a great fan of the social media and all the opportunities that the digital world offers. Look what we're doing right now. We have somebody in Sheridan, Wyoming. We have somebody in Medford, Oregon. We have somebody in just north of Kansas City. Shane's in Kansas City. I'm just north of Toronto, Ontario, and people all over the world are going to listen to this. So I mean, they need to grasp on to the opportunity that is being presented to them, which is why I think the hobby's growing. I mean, I went to Eric Hansman has the design build op page operating, design build op page, and he has a list of RPM meets, upcoming railroad prototype modeler events. And it's a prototyper, there's one in Cocoa Beach in January. Then there's one in Alameda, California towards the end of January. Then there's one in Portland, Oregon on February 10th. Then there's one in Toronto on March 4th. And then there's one in Tulsa that our friend Chris Atkins goes to. It's Layout Design and Operations Weekend. And then there's one in Malvern, Pennsylvania, the RPM Valley Forge meet, and Savannah, prototype modelers meet in Savannah, Georgia, and the Coldfield Railroad's RPM and scale train show in Roanoke, Virginia, and the Central Ohio RPM meet. And it just goes on and on and on. And these are all independently run meets that are all under the flag of the RPM. It's a fascinating thing. I was going to ask you a good question, and I can't remember what that is, and that always happens. Oh, yeah. Now that you're out of the hobby and you don't have any particular allegiance to ExactRail, I know I understand that it was a company you worked hard at and you put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into it, and we talked about that before. But who are the manufacturers, if you don't mind me asking, and if you feel that this is an inappropriate question, I certainly understand, but I feel that you're out of the industry now. So who are the manufacturers that stand out to you as leaders in the hobby, in the manufacturing of locomotives and freight cars, or buildings for that matter?
Yeah, so let me preface this answer briefly with a comment, and then I'll lead right into it. It was mentioned at the beginning of the podcast that it's the prototype-minded enthusiasts that are really driving the market forward. And although I don't disagree with that statement categorically, I do think that the people that create prototype models that do it at sort of the upper echelons of the industry do it because of the passion that they have for the hobby and not for the financial incentive behind it.
Right.
And I think my experience at ExactRail lends itself to those comments insofar as ExactRail had a number of different product lines, whereas some of the top tier manufacturers are a little bit more focused in their approach.
Right.
And that allowed me to see firsthand sort of how a breadth of products performs in the industry. And so people that run prototype modeler meets, the people behind the creation of really great models, that happens because those specific people are passionate about it. I don't think the market drives that. The level of input that execution of a high-end model requires, for me personally, meant, laying out under freight cars at the wee hours of the night, because it takes hours and hours and hours of collecting photographs and buying images. And when I was at ExactRail, I did that all with my own money. And I'm not saying that to advance myself in any way, but the point is I don't think I'm unique, right? I think the people that are doing this are just all in, burn the ships, all in for the creation of great models. And I don't think that the profit incentive is necessarily justifies that kind of passion. That said, to answer your question, I think the people doing the work at the top of the industry in terms of fidelity and great work is definitely at this point Tangent and Moloko. They build fantastic models. They're expensive because nice models are expensive.
Right.
But they're beautiful. They definitely have their eye on accurate replicas and recreations, and they're the two people that I really look to when it comes to solid delivery time and time again.
Okay, so now
that's not to say that they don't make mistakes. I mean, everybody does, but I mean, these people have the vision.
Right. Okay. So now I'm going to sound like a complete goofball here, but we're all used to that. Moloko?
Yeah, Moloko.
How do you, an Maloco?
Yes.
No. Molloco.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. That too.
Okay. So has everybody else heard of Moloko?
Yep. Nick Molo from Down Under. It's his company. It's based in Canada. Nick started out, I believe, in the 90s with caboose detail kits, and he did like a transfer caboose that you could build on a flat car, and then started with some high quality flat stock boxcar kits, and production was moved to China to make them fully assembled, and they're General American, like early 1960s to mid 60s boxcars. That he's got a new Fruit Growers Express car out with 12-foot plug door that's just come out, and they're definitely Cadillacs in the industry. Great stuff.
And Mr. Kelly, had you heard of them?
No, I have not.
Mr. Mason?
Pardon?
Have you heard of Moloko?
Pardon?
Yeah, exactly. So that's fascinating. So this is a company that you feel is one of the leading leaders in the industry, and two of the four only one of the four culprits here has heard of them. So that's fascinating. That's fascinating. And they're based out of, where did you say they're based out of? Somewhere in Canada.
Well, Nick
in Mississauga,
is from Australia, and the company is based out of Canada.
Right.
But they ship, and I think this is an important note because shipping from Canada can be expensive. They ship from the United States. So
wow.
If shipping is a concern, then he's thought about that. And
okay, so now see, I'm gonna completely. You and I are gonna have this discussion many, many times over the years, and we're gonna have to each do our homework and come up with pros and cons. I think the hobby's growing like crazy because here's a company that in actual fact is less than 50 miles from where I'm sitting right at this minute, and I've never heard of them, and you're telling me they're producing some of the best models in the industry. And my argument is, who is buying this stuff? There has to be so many, there has to be so many people in the hobby to be buying scale trains and Tangent and Moloko and Athearn and all these places. And let's not forget, can we guys, Bruce and Tony and Shane, can we not forget the popularity of the liquefied manure pit?
Boy,
Yeah.
From Faller?
Of course.
From Faller?
Of course.
I mean, Faller basically took over the industry with that particular gem.
Just think of all the increased interest in lifeguard towers and lifeboat rings and people swimming.
So,
I heard almost everybody in America ripped out at least one siding for a manure pit.
Yeah.
how
One
did that-
industry had to go.
I don't even
So-
remember how that started. Anyways,
In terms of how we all got started on it,
yeah.
I believe our good friend Jim Sacco had posted about it.
Yes, exactly. Yes, Jim Sacco from City Classics. Yes, Blaine. So okay, let me just tell Blaine what we're talking about. Faller Industries has a liquid manure pit kit that they're very proud of. So there you go.
Oh yeah, I've got 3 of them.
There you go.
Oh, there you go.
Unit manure trains.
Yeah. Okay.
So, Lionel, I'm looking at that site for Moloko or whatever it is,
Moloko. Yeah.
Moloko.
and they've got 3 boxcars that are already sold out that sold at $53 a piece.
Yeah.
Right. When those fruit growers' cars went up the other night, I had emailed Nick and asked him about reviews for some of those and what he wanted to cover, because my dad and I were looking at buying some cars, and he told me then, and this was the day they went up, he said, well, I think the Burlington Refrigerator Express was one that Dad and I both wanted. He said, well, make sure you get your order in soon on that one, because the way it's looking today, it's going to sell out. And again, that's the day it hit. But I think a lot of these, again, it's a smaller run.
Yeah.
These
Do we
are
know?
not
Do you know how many cars he runs?
exactly no, but I guarantee you, it's not the same as a 50-foot box car from Bachman or Athearn.
Oh, no,
It's
yeah.
a much
And it's-
smaller run.
I have an idea. I'm not going to speak for Nick's business. That would be unfair to Nick.
Right.
But yeah, I have an idea, and they're modest runs. It's a modest market, but of course it is. I mean, he's striving to provide, a product that sits right at the top, and so of course it's a little bit more niche.
He's got to be doing at least 500 cars, at least. I mean, I'm just looking at the undecorated cars, and they're all sold out.
Yeah.
I mean,
It's not for me to say, but
I'm looking along lines the way we do things at Microtrains. Now we're putting out multiple cars, but a typical run would be anywhere from 200 to 500, 400 cars, say. That would be a typical run.
See, and that fascinates me, because here's people that are making a living. Granted, these are not huge companies, but there's so many of them where these companies are making, 2 or 4, 3 to 400 cars or whatever it is, or 200 cars, and people are existing on this, and
well,
go ahead.
To be fair, Nick Molo has a day job.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
He's a tool maker, and Dave Lelbach, who owns Tangent, isn't a full-time employee of that business. He has a day job as well. And that sort of speaks to my point about how, the people that are working to deliver these kinds of projects are driven by the passion that they have.
Yeah,
for the
for sure.
Yeah. I'm looking at his parts section, and he's got items that are sold out. I mean, that's pretty, and that's only the first page. Let's see what else I got to say. Warp stuff. I mean, it's like you say, he's got a day job. He probably doesn't have a lot of time to, I don't know if he's doing this stuff in China, I assume, right?
Correct. Yeah, his production is in China for those things.
So he's probably, he waits for enough, sees enough orders that he could probably make it worthwhile to do more than one part.
I think a lot of his production, again, at the old brass business model of, we're going to do this, it's a special run, it's kind of a one-time thing, they're hand built. In a lot of ways, you can look at those Tangent cars, the Moloko cars, and it's kind of like that. So
Are they is Tangent and Moloko, are they connected?
no, they know each other.
They know
I
each,
mean,
so they're not being made in the same factory or anything like that.
that I don't know.
That'd be an interesting question to ask.
Yeah,
I mean, it'd be
they're-
similar. Go on.
No, they're not.
They're not. Okay.
no, I think Blaine knows a lot of. I think you know what? We're gonna have to blindfold him and bring him
Yeah.
into a dark room and beat him with some wet
And
hydrocarbon.
develop them?
Yeah,
We can threaten them. We'll throw them in the manure pit.
Blaine, as always, you're talking to you is endlessly fascinating. You are like one of my favorite people to talk to, and everybody I talk to Joe Fugate the other night. I've interviewed so many people, and I have yet to. Everybody that I interview is this hobby is fascinating, and the people in it are fascinating. Just endlessly fascinating. And Blaine, once again, you have not disappointed. I could sit and talk to you for hours, as we talked last time. Last time we talked about, just talking about the philosophy of life and model railroading. It would be an endlessly fascinating discussion, at least for the two of us.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you.
It's so cool to talk to you. Boys, do we have any more questions for this young gentleman?
Have you gone train spotting in Sheridan yet?
Oh my gosh. So Sheridan is on the CB&Q main line out of Gillette, Wyoming. And I don't know that many people are aware that the CB&Q came this far west. But the line between a small place called Arvada into Dayton, which Sheridan is on that line, is just beautiful. And the CB&Q main line through the Wind River Canyon is stunning beyond belief. It's absolutely shocking to me that both of these areas aren't modeled more frequently. And if anyone ever gets the chance to drive through here, I would encourage that you see those places, because they're amazing. They're amazing.
Does Sheridan have a hobby shop?
It doesn't, but it does have a railroad presence here, and they have a large steam locomotive on display in town, and then the station is a museum, and then adjacent to the station, by just a block, there's a CB&Q depot. So there's definitely railroad presence here.
Mm-hmm.
And going back to our argument of whether or not the hobby is growing or retracting, I'm fascinated by, I have a place in Florida and not that far away in Plant City. They've built they have a beautiful train observation platform they've built.
Mm.
Just gorgeous. And so many towns seem to embrace their railroad heritage, which,
Yeah.
and I've talked to Tony about, like the Spirit of America, that locomotive, like and the Heritage Unit series, it's like it forces you to get out and it gives you something to look at, so I don't know. It's like you say, like the hobby it's fascinating. It's a fascinating, to try to decide where we're at, and really it doesn't matter because we're enjoying it anyways, but I'm just, it seems to grow, and to me it seems to grow. Like you said, Moloko, like there's something I learned tonight that never even heard of those guys, and yet they're at the top of your list of people producing freight cars.
Yeah, they do great work. I listened to I can't remember where I heard it, so forgive me. I don't know how to cite it, but it was in maybe an NPR podcast or something of that sort. I don't recall, where a person was talking about technological trends. And so, for example, in the 60s, film was the medium to shoot movies in, and then digital technology came into play. And now in recent years, you have a rejection of the digital format among some filmmakers, and they're shooting again in film. Right? And, we've seen the pendulum shift far to to online channels for sales like Amazon. And this particular pundit was claiming that just like other trends, that pendulum is going to swing back because shopping is an experience. And, the trend that hobby stores have gone out of business. He wasn't speaking specifically to hobby stores, it's clear, but the analogy or the conclusion that I drew from it is that, shopping is an experience and people aren't going to relinquish that entirely. And, I hope that's true. I think that's true also for the hobby. There have been, believe it or not, a couple of brick and mortar stores to start up in recent years, and they seem to be having a real go. And I think the best example of that is Spring Creek Model Trains in Deschler, Alaska.
Yeah, in the middle of nowhere.
In the middle of nowhere.
Not far from Strang, Nebraska, though.
And it's huge. They purchased an old supermarket.
I know, it's huge. It is huge.
It's huge.
And it is not far from Strang, Nebraska.
Yeah.
So
the Zockers that own Spring Creek, they carry Moloko. If you go to train shows, they usually always have Tangent and Moloko cars that are not always common things to find in hobby shops. The Moloko cars are in white and dark green boxes, window display cardboard boxes. And if you're ever at a show that Spring Creek is, just ask them. And I know Lombard Hobbies in Chicago is another place that carries Moloko. That it had a little trouble at first, as Blaine said, with the Canada element. At first, when you bought things, they're already $50-ish cars, and then shipping from Canada was certainly not an incentive, to purchase. Yeah. And that they do now ship from the U.S. So if you order, that's no longer the order I just placed the other day. It was $9.95, and I think we had like 4 cars on it. Right. So. And I think it's even free shipping after you buy 6 if you buy that many. Right. But those are, and as Blaine said too, on the hobby, the magazine industry is another one that this year Model Railroad News' numbers are positive compared to the year before, that our circulation has gone up. We started HO Collector in 2017, and it's starting its second year. So again, starting a brand new magazine at a time when you'd say, oh, nobody would do that. So again, you look at these things, and I think you hear a lot of stuff, not to pull out the old fake news tagline, but you hear those things, and I think there's a lot of hand-wringing and maybe just it's not really exactly as dire as certain things may sound, whether it's the hobby or publishing or anything.
Yeah, exactly. And by coincidence or on the same topic, I used to originally ship this podcast from Canada, and now I ship it from Florida, and it's that much cheaper again to get. Like when you
is it available in French yet, though? Is there a French translation?
No, there's not yet a French translation. We are working on a Czechoslovakian translation, but French is not on the list.
If you need an Italian translation, I could help.
I know. That's another. I'm telling you, someday I'm going to start a podcast just talking to people about their lives, because people are endlessly fascinating. And another little side note. If you're going to Gillette, and you're probably aware that not too far down the road is a place called Sturgis, South Dakota, which is home of a huge motorcycle rally, which I've ridden to occasionally. And between those two towns is one called Hewlett, Wyoming, which is not far from Devil's Tower. And and Hewlett used to be a great place to go to, particularly on the Wednesday of the Sturgis Motorcycle Rally, because they had something, I don't know what this was, and I'm not saying I ever went 4 times, but on the Wednesday they had something called No Panty Wednesday.
Oh, jeez.
And I'll let you decide what that was on your own. But it was a lot of fun.
Well, I'm assuming that means you didn't wear any shorts.
Yeah, he went commando.
Yeah. And it didn't really have anything to do with the boy. The only thing it had to do with the boys is we stood around with beers in our hand and went, "Wow." Did you see that? Yeah. All right. I think we've worn this poor fellow out. Blaine, thank you very, very much for talking to us. You are. I'm going to talk to you. You're going to have. You're going to have to. I'm afraid you're going to have to accept that this is going to become a semi-regular occurrence.
I would love that.
All right.
If you can tolerate me, I would love that.
You're a fascinating guy to talk to because you got lots of insightful thoughts, and I think you are a huge asset to the hobby, and don't forget that. And enjoy running that prototype modelers meet, because you're doing the hobby a great favor, as so many are. Like Shane's doing the hobby a favor with his enthusiasm, and Tony does it with all his hard work with the Model Railroad News and what he does. And Bruce does it with Bruce. If you didn't know, I don't think I mentioned it at the start, but Bruce is the president of every Model Railroad Club within 100 miles of where he's sitting. So anyway, so who wants to give out the email address? Anybody? Tony?
Ball?
Tony?
Me?
Yeah.
Can I say that?
Yeah.
Oh. If you would like to contact us, you can do so by sending an email to modelerslife@gmail.com. That's with one L, not two, like Lionel.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly. And we have a website, modelerslife.com. That's amodelerslife.com. And if you go there, you'll find a button for our Facebook page and our Patreon page, Twitter address, and we're gonna. So we have Twitter, we have a modelerslife.com, and Gmail address. And okay, so now you probably don't remember, but your job now is to say "Happy Rails" to you at the appropriate moment.
Okay, let's do it.
All right. Well, Blaine, as we close the barn doors on another episode of A Modeler's Life and the sun slowly sets over the back 40, I guess there's nothing else left to do except for you to say,
Happy Rails to you.
Close the door. You're letting the cold in.
It's another Lincoln Homer.